Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this free episode of
the
Tea.
free one.
Not avoiding it again.
We're back in 2022, and it is the free one.
You know, there were a few where I managed to bulldoze into introducing the guests before you were able to do that.
You were just like, it's the episode you don't pay for. It's that one.
Yeah, it's that
the
one.
The non-charged one.
Look, before I introduce our wonderful guests, I just want to say happy 6th of January. Congratulations to everyone involved on both sides. I think
we got this nice lectern that we have in the studio.
You all did a great job, again, on both sides. And I think everyone who perished that day should get a state funeral. Everybody on either side should get a state funeral.
Yeah, they should dig them up
my
and
opinion.
do a state funeral now.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. But here, of course, helping us celebrate in the usual style, which is, of course, to talk about the theory of the high-tech economy. Look, it's how America's celebrated January 6th for ages. It is, of course, This Machine Kills Jathan Sadowski and Ed Ngueso Jr. Guys, how's it going?
Hello. Yeah, I mean, I am American, but I live in Australia, so I'm the only one in my neighborhood celebrating January 6th. I'm setting off fireworks.
Roasting a turkey.
Yeah. I'm wearing my...
Crikey, mates, I may have moved to this country, but I'm not Australian.
I hope everyone...
I'll rack off my January 6th situation.
I'm wearing my traditional January 6th cargo pants and lei.
Oh, yeah.
It's, I mean, look.
Yeah, Riley's dressed in all Under Armour in honor of the occasion.
Yeah, I smashed a few cans of Monster on my way here.
I punched a cop, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but that's just a Saturday for me.
In Australia, you're allowed to do that.
That's right. It's encouraged.
Australia has a Pink Panther rule where it's to keep them sharp.
Yeah,
you know,
that's right. It's the cop's job to not allow themselves to be punched.
Yeah. It's welcome to you both, and welcome to you, the listener. So we've got a lot on today. It's Riley, Hussein, and Milo from the TF side. And there's just a lot of stuff that's been going on in the technology industry. Have you guys heard that the web is finally upgrading to 3.0? Pretty exciting.
Yeah. I'm excited for that.
Yeah, that's cool.
One web for each gender.
Keep up with USB.
And of course, the main thing about it is that it's meaningfully different and not just, as you have said to me in DMs, Jathan, the same old sour wine of neoliberalism in new cryptocurrency-shaped bottles.
Totally not that. I'm kind of disappointed Jathan doesn't share my enthusiasm for what promises to be the transformation.
Web 3.0 promises, number 1, stacks on deck.
Right.
Number 2, Patron on ice. Number 3, gas up the jet for you tonight, baby. You can have whatever you like.
Yeah,
what?
This is
That's
the real
T.I.'s hit song, whatever you like.
Oh, okay.
This is the real schism that's going to tear apart This Machine Kills. Is my downer attitude towards Web 3.0 and Ed's rightfully booster attitude towards Web 3.
I'm going to build a mansion in the metaverse on Crypto Island and charge everybody Tether to get in and get rich. It's going to, and then fund the left. That's how I'm going to save the left.
I hate knowing what any of that means, let alone knowing what all of that means.
Well, if you want to know what all of that means, or at least most of it, then keep listening. But
would you like to suffer? Would you like to join us in hell? Keep listening.
But I wanted to talk a little bit about. I have a 5-minute British politics thing I wanted to talk about first, just because. Okay, so for context, everyone, especially our sort of Australian and American sort of friends and coworkers, there's been this set of regional pilots going on in the UK, a country that has a very, very, very regressive and punitive drugs policy, to effectively not even decriminalize, just stop prosecuting young people, especially young black people, but that's not said, but that's sort of what the implication is, for carrying small amounts of cannabis, which huge percentages of the population are prosecuted for doing, and most of them just railroaded into the criminal justice system.
The trouble is, there's all these kids in London what are shooting up cannabis and getting on smacked up, and then they're addicted, and then they go around killing people.
That's right. Just to get that next hit of indica.
That's right, yeah.
So a weed connoisseur who's so into weed, he's willing to kill for like the perfect strain.
That's right.
I call it in the couch. What's up?
That's right.
Jonesing for that hit of Dutch cheese.
So basically, right, that's what's happened. And Sadiq Khan, in the sort of labor-sensible mayor of London, in a rare, I think, quite correct and humane move, has said, we're going to imitate this policy. We're going to take this policy that's been trialed elsewhere, and we're going to trial it locally in a couple of London boroughs, where we're just going to say to the police, you're now directed to stop prosecuting in these conditions, like stop bringing charges. And immediately, Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer were both saying
Keir Starmer first, crucially.
Yeah, Keir Starmer, before anyone else,
Chief Keir Starmer
leapt out to say, we do not believe in changing the British drug laws. We think they are fit for purpose. We think drugs lead to violence and all this. At the response of someone in his party doing something, a very, very small pilot program.
Extremely watered down.
For a policy which that leads towards a policy that's like decriminalizing cannabis that's popular with the majority of the electorate,
and also is the only policy that fucking works. You idiot! But what I loved about this, though, is it led to something I would like to call the political Saturnalia, where the slaves were emperors and the emperors were slaves. Because on this one magical day of the year, the Prime Minister welcomed what Keir Starmer had said, an inversion. The tables were turned.
And I encouraged him to go further.
I would call him to go further.
That's the thing, right? He says it increases power of criminal gangs and drugs are associated with crime.
Making drugs illegal increases the power of criminal gangs. Next question. You fucking idiot. That's obvious. You could teach a child this.
Yeah.
If you make something illegal, it puts it in the hands of criminals. This is almost like fucking like first principles shit.
See, I think I kind of agree with him in the sense that like if you kind of legalize, I know this isn't legalization, like this is just kind of like a facetious thing, but anyone who's been to Vancouver sort of knows what weed culture is like. It's filled with like fucking nerds. And he's just protecting the integrity of weed culture.
Keep it cool. That's your argument.
Yeah. In Britain, we smoke weed that smells of piss and looks like shit. And it should stay that way.
Sadiq Khan wants to gentrify weed.
That's right, exactly. I don't want any of this like fucking indica kush shit. I want the weed that I get from a chicken box in like a weird KFC in Camden that tastes of grease and it's fine.
Yeah. But like, look, it goes to show, right? A couple of days ago, he made his first speech of the year where he said, I don't think politics is a branch of the entertainment industry. I think it's the serious business of getting
not when
things
you do
done.
it, mate.
Yes, that's right.
But look, I don't want any of you getting too excited during my speech. So what I've done is I've dressed up in a big grey sack. Now,
but I think that if you want to take seriously this, and the other thing, right, is basically I think drug decriminalization is the most you could possibly expect at this point from a kind of center-left party, if only because it's politically very popular. It's basically got no cost. It gives you like it is kind of, and it's been done in other places by other like center left political organizations. It's no risk, and it's the thing they can do that would just take the boot a little bit off the people on whom the boot is pressing down on some of the hardest, that where they can affect the hardness of the boot.
It's one of these rare policies where it actually saves money, it solves a lot of the problems, and it harms no one.
Yes.
There is no constituency other than people who are annoyed by it in an imaginary way in their own head. There's no person it actually affects negatively at all.
And the only thing I want to add before getting into what we're here to actually talk about, right, is that I think this goes to show, especially, right, we talk about the British media being an extension of the state. And and the fact that like these policies that are popular and easy and proven elsewhere are politically impossible here, it's because the British media has performed a kind of cup and ball trick, a kind of three-card Monte, where what happens is the sensible majoritarian view is switched out for a basically a very hard punitive view. And I think this links into the fact that the state's mission for the last 40 years has been to sort of wind itself out of existence, to say, look, the business of social reproduction in terms of carrots is no longer happening. We're not doing social housing. We're not doing the NHS because capital can just get workers elsewhere. It doesn't need to preserve these workers, really. And so what it needs for social reproduction is the police and the army, is the sticks. It needs the punitive organs that's solving capital's collective action problem, which is what the state exists to do.
How else would we know it's 4 a.m. British time?
And so what has happened essentially is that the British media has, again, working as an organ of the state, which is, again, this thing for capital, has essentially made it so that the only viable way forward is to love the police and BAE systems. It is saying the only things you can do is use and valorize the state as the instrument of discipline and punishment, because the state as the giver of carrots as opposed to sticks is now gone. And I think you can really see it in this drugs policy, which is, no, it doesn't matter. Discipline must be increased. And this is a majoritarian, this is the only sensible opinion to have in a democracy, even though it's wildly unpopular. And I think this is just a perfect case study of that phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, well, I want to jump in real quick and say that Starmer doesn't realize he's lying because he's playing a part when he says that politics is, not a branch of the entertainment industry. I mean, that's all it is it's pure theater, right? He is an actor on stage playing a part, as are other politicians. And when they claim it's about the serious business of getting things done, I mean, their actions speak to the contrary every single fucking time. They don't get anything done. But that's kind of the point, right? I think you're exactly right here, Riley, that this is the state winding itself out of existence, but doing so in this way that policies and positions that are already in place remain ossified, right? They become fossilized. So they don't go away. The state just stops doing stuff, and what already exists just continues forever. And then people like Starmer are there to be the ringleaders of this circus, kind of distracting you, dancing on stage, saying foolish things, gaffing to keep you entertained while nothing else actually happens. It's kind of the whole point.
Yeah. Well, the difference between someone like, Keir Starmer and Donald Trump is that they're both equally theatrical. It's just that Donald Trump's in a fun play, like a comedy with lots of pratfalls. And then Keir Starmer's in an Ibsen play at the National Theatre. He's playing it dead straight. They're both actors. It's just Donald Trump actually has some entertainment value.
I feel in the case of the Labour Party, it's also this kind of perennial problem that they have themselves created, where it's very much they're kind of fixated on these imaginary voters that we've discussed on the show before. These kind of voters that only exist inside their head and are constantly mad at them. And one of those things was obviously just respecting the police, right? Or, the idea that in these mythical voters, they really love the police, even though I'm not convinced any British person actually likes the police. They like the idea. They like the idea of it. Some of them, I think people in the suburbs like the kind of idea of a policeman keeping out weed smoking teenagers off their front lawns and stuff. But they don't really exist in practice. But because again, Labour is so sort of stymied by focus groups and focus groups of focus groups, they've kind of got it in their head that even this very obvious and sensible policy that they had been advocating, the Labour Party has sort of been kind of advocating it for a while. Now suddenly it sort of becomes untenable. And I think a lot of that comes down to this just fear that they have that any kind of policy they propose is going to be hated by these mythical voters who, by the way, just hate everything that they do. The way that it's set up is we can't propose anything because we'll alienate these sort of these kind of fictive working classes. And it just so happens to be married into this kind of much broader political consensus of the state can't do anything and you shouldn't expect it to do anything.
It does remind me, if we jump across the pond, New York Senator Chuck Schumer, who's the Senate Majority Leader.
Great guy, friend of the show.
Yeah, but he has talked explicitly about this imaginary family. He's written a book about them called The Baileys. And it's that's who he does policy for is literally this family that exists only in his head, who he imagines as his ideal constituent. But that's just an absurdist version of I think, Hussein, you're exactly right here, that that all of these politicians are doing is they have an imaginary constituent in their head who doesn't actually exist, and that's who they're doing policy for. I think there's I'll do a segue here for you, Riley, but I think there's a nice segue here from the kind of politics of entertainment, or politics as entertainment, to technology as entertainment as well, where this is truly both in the realms of politics and technology. It's all fucking pure marketing. It's all pure spectacle. Nothing gets done, right? Whether you call it innovation or you call it policy, nothing is actually getting done except for hucksters and grifters selling you something, right? Marketing you something, dancing on stage and convincing you that it's progress. Like, that's all it is in both spheres, technology or politics.
Your island baffles me sometimes, but I think it shares the same core tenet that the United States does about a belief that punishment is fundamentally good on some level, or that specifically some of the Tories and other politicians may believe, or unified in a belief that punishing people or being punitive on people is good and helps turn them into good characters, in addition to other lovely ideas they might have about skull measurements and sizes. So also part of me is not surprised, because it mirrors a lot of the debates also that happen here over drug legalization. Even the fact that drug legalization in of itself isn't something you can even really discuss. The barriers, decriminalization, because of the nice interplay of lingering phrenology, and also commitment to punitive measures that lingers here and is also present there. So I don't know. It feels like hearing a more polite articulation of some of the arguments here.
That is actually something that's quite fascinating, that America is actually in general further down the road towards drug decriminalization than we are in the UK, because in general America is both a moderately more reactionary and also more of an ice chewing Protestant ass country than Britain is. It's weird because in Britain drugs are almost effectively decriminalized for a lot of people. It's weird that it's not saying they often choose to prosecute unless it's a black teenager with a bit of weed. But at the same time, the idea of actually decriminalizing it is completely politically unthinkable.
Mm-hmm. Well, couldn't possibly do that. However, I want to talk about startups. So the startup, and by the way, I'll tell you now, the answer is not this group of people here around this table. The startup is called Brain Trust. Okay, Ed, what do you think Brain Trust is?
If I had to guess what Brain Trust is, I would think that it's a consulting group for foreign policy. If I, just off the name, consulting group for foreign policy, or a nice smokers club for VCs. That's the power that the name gives.
Got little velour jackets on,
a paneled wall, a velour jacket where it displays your ape.
Oh, yeah, that would be nice. The ape jacket.
Jathan, you know what it is, because we've talked about it extensively, because I was trying to figure it out. So I'm going to skip you. Hussein, Brain Trust, what do you think?
Okay, what if you could put your brain on the blockchain?
It is to do with the blockchain.
Of course it is. Kind of a given, because I know it has to segue into this episode. Right. So what if you could put your brain onto the blockchain and also turn it into some kind of asset? I
hate to tell you this,
but product. Am I right? Am I correct?
I mean, here's the thing. I know what you mean, which is personality uploading. But if you were to interpret what you said broadly, you would kind of be in the right ballpark.
Is it like holding yourself accountable for your Duolingo scores using the blockchain?
That would be fun and more useful than what it does.
What if you could decentralize your brain?
I would love to do that.
I want an NFT of the Duolingo owl.
Yeah, that's smoking weed and making the pussy eating gesture with shutter shades. It's $4 million. Eminem bought it.
Oh, fuck, it already exists. We've said it out loud.
One last thing. What if your brain was a kind of DAO structure where other people could decide what you were thinking?
Okay. So Brain Trust is a DAO. So it's a distributed autonomous organization. So again, he's saying you keep being right by accident a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
No.
A little bit. I feel the idea of like getting other people to think for you is a very sort of like thinking free idea.
No one makes me think my own thoughts.
They'd have to. If it was to be a Web3 idea, they would have to think for you, but they wouldn't know what they were thinking. They would just be sort of applying computational power in their brain.
That's pretty much how those guys operate. Yeah,
that's right. No, so we exist to spread economic opportunity more equitably around the world. Now, any organization that says it exists to spread economic opportunity more equitably around the world, what you can really interpret from that is wage arbitrage.
Yeah. It's like remote slavery, right? They've got like a warehouse full of people in the Philippines who are like doing a job that's in like Manhattan or something.
Yeah, that's closer to what it really is.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone want to sort of drive the final nail through the coffin?
Okay, there's a token.
Yes, there's a token.
There's always a token.
There's always a token, but the token, the name has to be like something stupid like brain coin.
It's stupider than that.
Oh no,
dumb coin.
Dumb coin is that? Oh no,
yeah, she got that dumb coin.
Smart coin, IQ coin.
No, it's the coin is brain trust, but with no vowels. It's like a throwback to 2011.
Oh, nice. Actually, brain coin would have been very fun, but instead of or like IQ coin, but instead of the C, it's the Q of IQ, so it's like iCoin.
Yeah, exactly.
That could be nice.
Look, you should work for Brain Trust because it's better than what they're doing. No, so Brain Trust's mission is to build the world's most impactful talent network, one that is user-owned, aligns incentives, and redistributes value to both talent, meaning freelancers, and organizations, meaning Apple and Deloitte and so on.
Those guys need some power redistributed to them, I think.
That's right. Well, here's the thing, right?
Because there's not another thing.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm afraid there is indeed another thing. So Brain Trust is a blockchain. So it's a DAO based on a blockchain that's governed by smart contracts. So just like an NFT is on a website like OpenSea, but the engine of who owns it or owns the NFT is a smart contract. So you, as a freelancer, you have a profile with Brain Trust, but there is no organization called Brain Trust. You're just linked to this distributed autonomous organization.
You just trust the brain.
Yeah. And then if you want to hire freelancers, you do the same thing. You can connect to it, but there's no central organization. There's no one who owns it, really. Now, of course, we five here all know that's a sleight of hand, right? But that's the basics. It is a talent. It's like Monster.com or Jobs.com or Indeed or whatever, right? It's a job board.
Monster.com, where you go to look for monsters.
Monsters of JavaScript, yes.
Yeah, Geralt of Rivia logging on to Monster.com.
Just learning how to
ironically, to look for a job, but in a different sense.
And so when they talk about redistributing value to talent and organizations, they're like, well, hey, check it out. The big platforms, they're like landlords, right? They're sitting on all of this information. And what we're going to do is unite the interests of capital and labor by kicking out the landlords. They're Georgists.
Oh, yes.
They're digital Georgists.
It always comes back down to Georgism. Always. Why is there never a Maoist startup, right? Why do they always have to be fucking Georgist?
I'm just imagining like a room full of people where the dude's like, so they're landlords, right? And everyone's like, yeah, they're fucking landlords and we hate landlords, right? Yeah, so okay, we're gonna kick them out and be the new landlords. Just hissing and booing.
A Maoist startup called Furnace with no vowels. And it's a decentralized iron smelting organization where they put a pig iron furnace in everyone's backyard.
I think we're pretty comfortable like what this thing does, right? It's a jobs board on the blockchain, on a blockchain. It runs on a version of Ethereum, but not Ethereum itself, obviously, because that would be too expensive. And it's all for like high value jobs. Like if you're a front end engineer and you want to work for 3 months for $150,000, this is where you post that job. So here is their mission. The way we work is broken. In fact, it's been broken for a long time now. We'd hoped the gig economy would usher in a new era of autonomy and abundance.
Oh, I see. They're stupid.
What's up?
Okay,
yeah,
right.
What's up?
Yeah. Tell me you're stupid without saying you're stupid.
I really thought that, piecework, if you put it on a phone, would have a different result. I thought if you add the phone to the piecework, then that makes you rich, as opposed to every other time anyone else has done piecework, which makes them poorer.
What's amazing is that like a half of these companies, it feels like they're reverse engineering a Black Mirror episode. Like they've seen it and they're like, yeah, what if that was your phone? Actually, maybe that could be a good startup.
But they said the economics didn't pan out. They fucking did. They absolutely did for the people that designed them.
We democratized access to servants, and I cannot understand why people are angry about this.
A few wealthy people, the white paper goes on, because, by the way, these companies now don't have websites anymore. They have white papers because they're not companies.
White papers.
Yeah. Or they have tokenomics documents, right? They're not, because they're not companies. They're non-profit organizations that own the branding of a blockchain that, quote unquote, no one owns. Again, we'll get into how that's a falsehood. A few wealthy people became even wealthier, and the average worker is still scrambling to make a living.
Crazy.
You know what? A deepening and intensifying of the employer-employee relation. Yeah, because it's not like Indeed or like Uber. Like that's not like it's not that expression of that individual company. It's the relationship. They're like, what if we change the way the relationship came to be? The traditional work until you retire contract between employer and employee is being disrupted by short-term, rapidly changing engagements. Work history is moving from subjective records to immutable ones with ratings and verifiable expertise.
Awesome. Yeah, record my toilet break on the blockchain. Please do it. I want my future employers to know. I want it to be written in like fucking tombstone so that like future generations will know about when I took a shit on company time.
Also, the idea that moving from subjective records to immutable ones, the implication being that the immutable records on the blockchain are objective, not subjective. But motherfucker, where did that record come from? Did it come from you? The same way as the other one did? Like, it's the same record.
Yeah, it's like I think the imaginary behind why these things are disruptive or genuinely transformative is that someone say, well, the problem is that if you work at Acme Incorporated, that HR, someone malicious person, could go and change your record. We're gonna stop that scourge of that thing happening. As opposed to the fact that they can record whatever they want anyway. And in this case, right, like even if there's no central organization called Brain Trust recording it, they still control what information gets pulled in. They still code what information gets displayed. And yeah, you can vote on that kind of thing with governance tokens, which we'll get to in a second. But boy, is that broken for other reasons that we'll also talk about.
It reminds me when I was growing up in like elementary school, like they would threaten us as kids to be like, this is going on your permanent record. Right, like you're late for class. That's going on your permanent record, right? The implication being
Riley does this all the time. Don't be late for podcast.
The implication being that one, there is a permanent record that exists and follows you through life, and two, that like future opportunities when you're an adult will depend on your elementary school permanent record. And like Milo was saying, they hear a bad idea or a bad thing, and they're like, oh, that's good, let's do it, let's actually do it. Like that's what they're trying to do here. They're trying to make the permanent record into reality.
It's amazing how libertarians are always just like, okay, we hate the state, we hate taxes, we hate being forced and coerced to have our money extracted at every venture. So what if we reorganize society so that all of that is just how we all live every single day, and there's no office where you have to check in and do that, right?
Yeah.
What if everyone watched everybody and stole money from everybody all day, every day? Wouldn't that be great?
Okay, because it's a corporation, not a state. Like we read that book by David Friedman, Milton Friedman's son.
Who said we're not real Luddites because we don't know what Luddism is.
Yeah, we on TMK we read this book called Machinery of Freedom, which is a field guide or a hand manual for anarcho-capitalism by Milton Friedman's son, David Friedman. And it really is just like creating the state, but calling it corporations and saying this is okay, actually.
But in this case, it's not even corporations. It's a non-profit foundation, and then everything is in the code. which is different somehow because institutions are bad and code
right.
is not an institution.
What if it was a computer? That would be good. Stuff like this makes me think a lot about a thing that Stuart Lee once said in a different context, where he described social media as like a Stasi staffed by gullible volunteers. And like so much libertarian shit is basically that.
Further context. So they say in the white paper, workers are increasingly abandoning the extractionary model of platforms. Meaning that I post a job on like Fiverr or whatever, someone else buys that job from me. So they purchase my labor, and then the platform takes a huge commission by benefiting from the network effects that it has of having all those people signed up to it. Essentially being it's a rent.
Yeah.
It is essentially being a digital landlord, right? And they're saying, what if we eliminated those rents by having by putting this on the blockchain? Which again, sort of makes sense on its own terms, but the idea that this is going to abandon the extractionary model of labor is ludicrous. He says, but also listen to this: in the wake of a global pandemic that demonstrated that remote work is possible on a mass scale, and essentially that workers have much more power, workers are unwinding out of traditional employment arrangements and become their own nodes in sprawling freelance networks, a global phenomenon described as the Great Resignation. And what this really is like, this is the libertarian answer to increased worker power. It's don't unionize, freelance more efficiently using the blockchain. Effectively, this is the libertarian answer to the Great Resignation. Do not unionize, use the blockchain.
The two greatest prisons in capitalism are your mind and a union. And the sooner that you realize it, the sooner that you break out Neo.
Yeah, don't join a mind union, join a brain trust.
That's right. The work revolution coincides with a social revolution, spurred by heightened awareness of broader social inequalities. Modern talent networks have long extracted disproportionate value from workers, building their enterprise value by levying high fees on their users. They also refer to the income gap between workers and owners, which they say this will fix. In short, the rich have gotten richer while workers have remained marginalized, the implication being our blockchain will fix that by basically correcting an information imbalance.
Cool.
So I mentioned earlier about the token. There's the Bruturist token. So there is because this thing needs to like govern itself, right? Because this thing needs some people steering it. What happens is the users of Brain Trust have Brain Trust tokens, which you can buy. And then the more tokens you have, the more votes you get on governance. And in a DAO, how governance works is there is it's built into the smart contract that the tokens recognize that you can vote on changes, and then the changes are kind of automatically executed. No one needs to go and execute them. And so that's how it is essentially governed. And you can use Brain Trust for Bruturist tokens for lots of different things. You can enhance your job postings with them, or you can enhance your proposals. You can level up your skills, quote unquote, by using Brain Trust tokens to like put little experiences on your immutable permanent record. And also then you can govern the way that the blockchain works.
So bribes.
Yes. And then here's the interesting thing. Do you know, and again, don't forget, this is not a company. There's no company here. There's nothing called a corporation. There's no startup. There's a nonprofit foundation that has all the branding, and then the blockchain, which has the governance tokens. Isn't it weird that Tiger Global, Coatue Investments, and Omidyar Technology have spent $100 million buying these tokens for this nonprofit, user-owned foundation that's a cooperative on a blockchain that will never make any money?
And that Brain Trust, this nonprofit, aren't they valued at like $4 billion or something like that? Weird.
I don't know what the market capitalization of their token is offhand. Like that's how it would be valued.
Yeah,
is the market
I
cap
think the
of the
market
token.
cap is over $4 billion from what I've seen.
Wow, this is
why not
crazy. What the fuck? No, guys, this is not, like you said, it's totally not a corporation. This is backed by three of the most like bloodthirsty, ruthless venture capital funds or capitalist networks you can imagine. Says nothing about what we're doing here.
Yeah, I mean, this organization that, like, Tiger Global, one of these organizations where if they put $100 million into an investment, they do that because they want to get back $10 billion, right? Those people, they didn't do that this time. They just bought all these tokens for funsies because they loved the white paper.
Well, they love democracy. Right. That's why. They just wanted to vote a lot Because they love the governance system of ancient Athens.
Right.
They're big on that over at Tiger Global.
Wow, Riley thinks that people are incapable of learning and growing. All right.
It's sort of it's sort of incredible how like it's like one of the classic situations where like they've sort of diagnosed the problem correctly, i.e. that like, okay, you have this kind of unstable labor market and like, you have like this abundance of freelancers and lots of these freelancers are kind of like fighting for minimal amounts of work and everything. And this is a problem. This is a structural economic problem. And like, yeah, even kind of, you can make the argument to kind of say that, okay, well, more empowerment for these types of precarious like forces of labor are probably a good thing. But then their kind of solution to that is this sort of like weird tokenized system, which can very, very easily be exploited and is designed to be exploited, because they can't kind of reach the logical conclusion that most people have, which is that maybe getting more money might be a good thing. And like people think that is a better source of empowerment. But anyway, I don't know. What do I know?
How they bring that in is they say, look, a normal job board will charge you like a percentage of what you take as fees for being on. And again, like the Georgist criticism of landlords isn't wrong. It's wrong that it stops there. And like, yeah, they're right that the platforms are incredibly exploitative and sort of rentieristic. But then because what they do is they've centralized all the information, and then they use the fact they've monopolized access to that information and the ability of people to communicate using it. They then just like charge rents on people using it. And they're saying, well, let's kick out the landlords. Let's kick out the platforms. Let's charge like a 10% fee to the clients only, so not the freelancers, in order to like, because the thing you do need to like pay to maintain or even like a DAO, right? Like you have to pay for like, hash. You have to pay for
those apes.
Yeah, you have to pay, but you do have to pay for things. That's like unrealistic to think you don't. But what I'm beginning to understand about these Web3 startups is that the goal is still the same, right? It's just that instead of buying shares in the company, you buy a huge number of the tokens and then hope that the tokens become very in demand. Because then what Tiger Global can do, let's say Brain Trust takes off, becomes really popular. It becomes a kind of quote unquote user-owned monopolist, right? Like, and then all of a sudden, if you want to say, I don't know, post a job and then promote it so that your profile is more visible, all of a sudden that takes Brain Trust coin. And who holds all that Brain Trust coin? Why, it's our good friends Tiger Global. They hold all that brain, and suddenly people are buying it. Their $100 million investment becomes very, very valuable, because what they've essentially done is they have sat and they have made themselves rentiers on the same process. It's almost as though, because if 10 years ago, Tiger Global would have invested in a job board that said, we're a local social mobile job board that's connecting kick-ass developers with awesome organization, like a Web 2 one, right? Like one that was more of a central organization. They're just doing the same thing. They're just calling it something else, effectively. And so this is like...
It's almost as though there's a theme developing on this podcast. People doing something that has existed for a very long time, but calling it something else.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as though a lot of those robots are just a guy.
So I think one of the things that's like when you and I were talking about Brain Trust and the DMs and like trying to like do some analysis and be like, what is going on here? Like, how are they making money? Like, how is this actually happening? I think part of the difficulty of sussing out a lot of these Web3 things is that there's equal parts grifters and useful idiots, and it's really difficult sometimes to discern who is a grifter, right? Who is like knowingly doing something that has baked into it exploitation and extraction, and like knows that they are running a grift, versus who is a useful idiot, who is so blinded by the ideology and the propaganda and the buzzwords that they are also doing something that has exploitation and extraction baked into it, but they don't realize that's what they're doing. And it can be like actually really impossible sometimes to discern between those two groups of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things we talked about this, right, is that it does kind of uncover one of the places that those two people come together, which is that they all have the same Hayekian fantasy that the market is itself this big distributed computer that can assign a quote-unquote fair value to everything. So they say, in the white paper, one of the key benefits of the Brain Trust network is its ability to provide efficient price discovery for all services. In a decentralized network, users are able to track in real time the market value of assets, in this case, labor. Consider sort of like digital asset exchanges like Uniswap, where the supply and demand of listed digital assets are easily observed by the public. And so a fair market price is indisputably produced by price discovery activities on these networks. Again, never minding what we know about the pricing of digital assets just being the same two guys selling the same picture of an ape spreading its butthole back and forth like 30 times for millions of dollars each, thereby setting the value. Right?
It's called the economy, Riley, and I don't see why you're being so down on it. We've got a recession to get out of.
And here's the other thing, right? I think the key question with understanding brain trust is, what does Tiger Global get out of it, right? Either they get an investment where they hold a coin that suddenly becomes super necessary to get if you want a job anywhere, and then Tiger Global can say, it's $100 if you want to post a job. Here you go. Have a fucking brain trust coin, you asshole. Or maybe what happens is there's a big hype cycle, and then Tiger Global, being the first investor, is basically bailed out of its investment by a bunch of retail investors who hope that someone else will bail them out of their investment, and so on forever, I assume.
So you're suggesting that at the top there's this one investor, right? And then below him there's a slightly wider shelf of investors.
Yes.
And then below them there's an even wider shelf of investors. And every shelf of investors relies on a wider shelf of investors below it. Now hear me out on this. If you were to take this on a whiteboard and then you were to draw lines around it, gunshot.
Milo, I know you have
right?
a classics education, and what you described sounds a lot like Plato's Republic, democracy.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, it's democracy.
right.
That was what I was about to say before I was rudely shot dead.
So it's look, the thing is, right? You could say that about any tech IPO because Facebook's never going to pay a fucking dividend, or Meta's never going to pay a fucking dividend, right? Because these things are things you buy because you hope the value is going to go up, and the value goes up when someone else pays more for it from you. And like the problem is that is stupid and unsustainable. Like, don't get me wrong, all of it is the whole thing, including stocks that pay dividends, stupid and unsustainable for reasons laid out by Marx. But this is sort of making it much faster and dumber. And you don't have to sort of...
You call that contradictions inherent to capitalism? I'll show you some contradictions, motherfucker.
This is a new kind of money.
Yeah.
Oh, American Can paying 3 cents a share. I invented my own money and I sold it to someone else for different money.
What about a $4 million ape that destroys the Amazon rainforest? Are you hearing me, Marx? You're a child. You know nothing.
Yeah. Right? And so there's all sorts of other talk of like, oh, we're going to democratize this and that. But like, if you're attracting the same VCs who want the same thing, what you've done is you have branded what's always happening as something that is somehow better. And you know what? I mean, the thing is, right? Maybe like, yeah, it is good to have like a user-owned talent network. It's probably the best way to govern that, realistically, is probably a decentralized autonomous organization. However, to have the problem is that because it is fundamentally the same as everything else, they're going to have a highly financialized way of interacting with it that's going to be bought by venture capital funds. And so it's no different.
Yep. Cool. Great talk, guys. Should we wind this up?
No, it reminds me of maybe a segue, but like, so I can't remember who said it, but they were like, is it any coincidence, that is the reason why Web3 has a 3 in it because there are 3 major investment firms that are pushing it, right? You have A16Z, and then you have, I think, Tiger Global. I don't remember the third one, right? And, it's like, that's how it always is. It's with Tiger Global also has been involved in one of my favorite investments that they've done is in like SPACs or in like the pre-Pershing Square model of
remember SPACs.
Right?
Right? Seems so quaint now.
They're back in pog form.
Oh, sorry. It's a normal company that's listed on the Grandpa Exchange. Boring.
Yeah. How is that a monkey?
What I love also, there's like they also saw an opportunity. They're like, look, we're just helping companies who want to get public but can't possibly get public go public. But then if you just look at the model, what's really happening is they are just foisting a bag of unicorn shit onto every single investor who comes after them because they got in the door, and you get free stocks when you get in the door. And similarly here, yeah, you get free tokens. Most of these business models, most of these DAO models, the way they're set up also is like you pour in a lot of money, and then you also are now in a position to just get free tokens for no reason other than existing, right? You get free tokens for staking them as like liquidity in really complex financial and speculative instruments. So even if they ate shit in their investment, they'd be able to be involved in really complex financial tricks and scams to make up some of that money or get it back. Maybe do a liquidity exchange for some AVAX if you want, right? And then play with degenerate tokens on other exchanges that are unregulated. You know, you could do anything with it. You just have to put enough money or skin into the game, and for them, it's nothing. Right.
Yeah, it's almost though you're big enough, you just win by being there.
Yeah, you just literally just throw money or buy lottery tickets if you're like Masayoshi Son. You know, you can do anything.
Oh yeah, that was a cool one. I respected that. That was great.
SoftBank will be investing in the lottery. Perfect.
Yeah.
Why not?
Somebody's got to win.
Yeah, might be me.
There's a lot more to talk about DAOs in general and how they have switched out a form of company script for doing actual labor as well, right? But I think that's for another time. I want to pull back, right? Because this group of us together, we've talked about when we come together, we tend to talk about different big picture things in the field of technology and trying to think of what we've talked about. The metaverse, for example, we tried to figure out what was making Netflix tick. And I think what I want to do is pull back again to Web3 in general. This thing that I think gets talked about a lot, but not well understood. And I think it's easy to think Web3 is just pictures of apes, and you're sort of not entirely wrong, but also not entirely right.
Yeah, there's some lions as well.
I'll remember those. I wonder if they're still worth tons of money.
Yeah, there's the lions. There's the silhouettes of women. That one. Lady shapes with Alan Partridge. Yeah.
No, so what? I mean, if I wanted to think about Web3 on its own terms, I've got a sort of potted definition from the Web3 Foundation. But Ed and Jathan, what do you? If you guys wanted to define web, I mean, Ed, you've given yours already, which is pushed by 3 VCs. Jathan, what do you think? What is Web3? How do you understand it?
Yeah, I mean, and I think this gets at a bigger point that you're also driving at here as well, Riley, which is that these so-called paradigmatic disruptions in the internet, right? Like it's called Web3 because it's following or supposedly following directly from Web 2.0, which itself followed from the web or Web 1, right? It's setting up for itself this phase model of history where the internet develops, the internet, whatever that is, right, develops in this linear stage progression from one thing to the next, and each one is, not even, people don't even talk about as building from each other, but again, as disruptions, right, as a paradigmatic rupture in what the internet means. And so while I think that's a lot of bullshit, and we'll talk about that, and it's very amaterial and ahistorical way of understanding these technological and cultural systems, the way that Web3 is often talked about by the mavens in favor of it is, they talk about Web 1, the analogy is a page, right? It's you log on and there's a web page and you read and that's all. And Web 2 is the platform, right? And we all know what that is. And Web 3 is the network, right? So it's it's meant to be, replaces the democratization of Web 2.0 with the decentralization of Web 3. right? Where it's no longer about this like model of liberal democracy and participation that a lot of people talked about, with the platforms of Web 2.0. It is a much more like libertarian, individualistic idea of, no, we are not coming together to do some kind of what Tim O'Reilly, who we'll talk about, calls collective intelligence of Web 2.0. We are instead becoming the ultimate atomistic Ubermensch of our own networks, right? Like we are decentralized in the sense that we are all the individual great men of history. Like that is really the model of the internet that Web3 is trying to push.
Yeah, well, it's why everything in Web3 always has its own special little money, right? Because every single interaction you have with any other thing needs to be somehow monetized.
Yeah, because that's the point of money, is that everyone has their own money, because you don't want a money where everyone has the same money, which makes it easy to exchange things with each other. You want everyone to have their own esoteric money, which then has to be complexly exchanged for the type of money you need to buy the other thing that you're buying.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's how an economy works.
If the old model of the economy is nobody has money and everybody wants it, the new model of the economy is everybody has money and nobody wants it.
I do sort of miss the old school capitalists who, like they were evil and everything, but like they understood that shit had to work.
Yes.
Yeah,
Like the Henry Ford types, they had a sense of, like the production line. Hilariously, I saw someone on Twitter yesterday trying to argue that like the production line was a particularly evil capitalist invention because it prevented people from having the skills to make the entire thing. And I'm like, oh yeah, because in the Soviet Union, every worker went to the factory and built an entire car. That was their day's work. That's what they did.
That is sort of like an orthodox Marxist view. Not that the Soviet Union is necessarily doing it, but rather that like the point of the production line is that the worker is no longer able to do anything except in the context of the production line, which he doesn't own.
Right. The division of labor is done in such a way where it's dehumanizing, and not like if you wanted to, you could just build whatever part of the car. I mean, it wouldn't be exactly efficient or productive, but if you wanted to, you could decide, I really am interested in this part. I'll
Montessori factory.
So that is sort of what we're talking about when we talk about the specific evil of the production line. It's because it sort of instanced that particular rupture of the worker from his labor. That's sort of what we're talking about.
But the thing about it is, it also happens to be a very effective way of getting something done. So if you had some people in charge of it who weren't evil, that could be like a great way if everyone could share in the benefits.
This is what they call dialectics.
Yeah, that's a very effective thing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Anyway, look, so back to Web3.
What if we democratize the factory? What if everyone got a token?
Yes, that's the point.
Milo, you hit it.
What if everyone in the factory got an ape?
All right, reel back,
And they
reel
use
back
those
a little
apes.
bit. You've gone a bit too far.
No, you've gone too far. No, we're not at the apes yet.
No, I insist on the apes. We're going to have our first schism.
That's it.
I'm Trotsky and I demand the apes.
First comes communism, then comes the apes, Milo. You've got it mixed up.
There's actually a page of the original volume 3 of Capital that talks about when the apes come in. It was just stuck to the other page.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So look, let's go with this.
I shouldn't have come on the Communist Manifesto.
So the Web3 Foundation, which this is Gavin Wood writing, who helped develop Ethereum. He wrote,
Personally, Gavin wouldn't. Sorry.
The key principles of Web3 is users owning their own data, not corporations. Global digital transactions are secure, which means trustless. And online exchanges of information and value are decentralized. So essentially, instead of Facebook sitting on a big bunch of data and then its goal is to obscure the cost of the service it provides you by taking a thing that you don't really notice and then selling it to other people you don't know it's selling it to, you, quote, own your own data. It's just you own it, for example, on a profusion of different blockchains that don't interoperate with one another and all have different currencies. It is, again, it's the Web3 story is a very tidy one if you're a doctrinaire Hayekian. And we know every time doctrinaire Hayekians have come together to try to make a society, we know what happens.
Yeah, we sure do.
You get a colonia dignidad situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's because the idea, what strikes me about this, right, is the fantasy of this revolution of the internet to be defined entirely by blockchains. Again, like, might happen because a lot of very wealthy and powerful people have an interest in it happening and they can make things happen. right? That future is one where things don't work very well because of this very, you might say, principled stand that the people in charge of building it are making in favor of hating institutions because they're institutions, because this is centralized, it's therefore bad. I must be master of all I survey. And that's how you get to your house burning down and trying to negotiate with the firefighter if they'll put it out.
Yeah. Yeah, how many apes will he accept to save your house?
Put out my burning house.
Yeah.
And, you know, so the Web3 supposedly architecturally is supposed to look something like this, right? It's these DAOs instead of corporations. It's cryptocurrency instead of money. It's sort of blockchains that generally put these things together because the rules can just be coded directly in on the smart contracts on the blockchains themselves. You don't need someone like, for example, approving my application to join Facebook, because what happens is you apply to Facebook. They have some rules internally in Facebook. You fill in your form. The form is checked against those rules. Then Facebook gives you a profile and then starts spying on you, right? How a blockchain would work architecturally is the rules are coded into the blockchain. There's nothing central. You don't give it to anyone else. You just put it on there, and if it fits, it sticks. Essentially, right? That's the sort of basic premise of how you put information onto this thing and how it communicates. Whereas Web 2.0, right? We talk about platforms, highly permissioned, walled committees, where they basically their whole profit is we center everyone together. And then by putting them all together, we can make a lot of money by data harvesting or ad targeting or whatever, right? And what I find sort of, and again, in theory, right? And if you're going to be a doctrinaire Hayekian, if you're going to be like one of these sovereign individual types, you could say, yeah, perfect. If everyone has perfect information, right? Because I know everyone else on this blockchain, I know how much it's going to cost for me to post to it, that everyone's going to make perfect decisions and all humans will be completely liberated. But Jathan, we were talking about this. That's completely fucking insane.
Yeah, I mean, it is very interesting to see. And again, this is what we've talked about, where it's like the old sour wine of neoliberalism poured into new stupid bottles, right? Because it really is like they continue to try to make Hayek happen, right? Quit trying to make Hayek happen. And they continue to try to find new technological systems to do so. Like, you know, we were talking about brain trust and reading the white paper. It is pretty striking how, you know, this is what makes me think they are useful idiots, not so much grifters, but useful idiots doing the same thing. But it is quite striking how that white paper is extremely hyper Hayekian in like the language it uses in terms of like price discovery, right? Efficient price discovery and so on. And it, you know, I think a lot of people who are aware of the thought of Friedrich Hayek and like, you know, his very famous essay, The Use of Knowledge in Society, right? The kind of neoliberal ideology that formed the basis of like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan and the Pinochet and Chicago boys, like, but I don't think a lot of people know that Hayek himself later in life became extremely interested in cybernetics and what we now know of as cognitive computing. And he called the market the greatest information processor mankind has ever built, right? Like he himself thought of the market as a big computer. And you know, it's very interesting to see that like this is in a lot of ways Hayek's dream finally being brought to some form of fruition. It's not, you know, the Pinochet coup happens and they literally put a knife in the screen, in one of the screens of CyberSyn, saying this is not what we believe in. But now, you know, fast forward 50 years later or whatever, and the Web3 goons are like, no, this is what we believe in. We believe in the neoliberal CyberSyn, but it looks like DAOs, it looks like NFTs, it looks like crypto, like, you know, and I you know, and as you said, like we know what happens in history when a Hayekian policy or society tries to come to fruition. It's brutal, it's authoritarian, it's nasty, it's all the Hobbesian adjectives. And I mean, there's nothing in history to show us that what's happening with Web3 will be anything other than that.
So Hussein, what's I want to bring you in on this as well.
I was going to say, R.I.P. Frederick Hayek. You'd have loved the ape. Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, it's like, you know, there's nothing I like disagree with, like, in terms of Jathan, who like knows much more about this than like I would. But yeah, I mean, one thing I was gonna say like before was, I mean, even at like a basic level, I sometimes like ask myself, you know, for all the kind of like virtues of like Web3 that the evangelists love to you know, to valorize, like they haven't really answered the basic question of like, why is any of this necessary? You know, like I kind of get the premise of like, you know, sovereignty over your data and data ownership and stuff like that, but like it doesn't to me like it doesn't really make a lot of sense when like the way in which like data is conceived of, which is very much like in a very particular, like extremely commodified way. I think, you know, when you kind of tell someone, yeah, you can own your data, like an ordinary person, like the thing is, okay, well, what do I do with it, right? Because the way that like Web 2 is kind of built, like, you know, where like you have this sort of like platform economy and you have like all these services that require like, you know, umpteen amounts of like data, you know, like they require like so much of your data and they require like so many kind of passwords and stuff. Like you can definitely make arguments that like Web 2 like isn't, you know, is kind of like hyper capitalist and like it's not particularly empowering, and that like, you know, it is kind of something that like no one really enjoys like using, but they've kind of like, we're all sort of coerced into it. But Web3 like doesn't answer any of those problems. It just kind of is kind of like, okay, well, we know that like you kind of are coerced into using the system. So what we're going to do is like, it's going to take like its worst excesses and force you to kind of engage with it on a much more personalized level. And we'll kind of give you like this kind of, you know, we'll kind of give you this token of like perceived autonomy that, as we've mentioned, you don't really have. And in exchange, you can kind of like give us more of your data very willingly, right? And you can give us more of your information really willingly, and we can sort of use that in like much more, you know, we can use that for like a lot of other things, and there's nothing you can do about it because it operates on like different blockchains and different servers. Like every time I try to engage with this, it's just like, what is the actual kind of case for this being an emancipatory technology? Right. And no one can really seem to answer that.
When you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? The blockchain guys want to solve everything with the blockchain. But then you get something like this, right, where it's got like the job board. Like if you really wanted a not-for-profit job board, you could set up like a proper like not-for-profit, which legally can't make a profit, and constitutionally say, okay, this is how this company is run. It runs this job board. It reinvests X amount of the money it takes into this whatever. It pays this many staff this much. Like you could just do that without decentralizing it and have like a not-for-profit job board. Like that's a thing you can have.
And this is kind of like the thing. But I mean, like, I really should have said it more succinctly, but ultimately, like, it comes down to just this idea that, like, the kind of user case for Web3 is being made by tech guys who have caused problems that they now want to solve in, like, their own very specific ways. And they see it as, like, not just a nail, but, like, a specific nail that requires, like, a specific hammer, which, you know, just often just tends to, like, benefit them.
Right. I think that's exactly right. And this has been a big problem plaguing us forever, is tech guys deciding they're going to solve the problems they caused, and getting a lot of oxygen, you know, and airtime with these claims. Like I remember, you know, 10 years ago, Jaron Lanier wrote that book, Who Owns the Future, right? And for those who don't know, right, Jaron Lanier is a pioneer of virtual reality, and has been drawing a salary from Microsoft for the past like 30 years as some like senior research scientist, but also has made a nice little name for himself as one of the early kind of like Tristan Harris style tech critics from within the tech sector, writing these pop books about like You Are Not a Gadget and Who Owns the Future. And the big solution he posed in this book from 10 years ago was around data ownership, and it was about everybody should own their own data, and then then you create this network of microtransactions where Facebook pays you fractions of a penny every time it uses your data. Google pays you fractions fractions of a penny, everything. So you have this whole network of microtransactions, which is then meant to be empowering, right? It's meant to be like, well, if data is a commodity, then you should own it and you should be able to sell it and get some money from it. But of course, the problem here is that's technically very dumb, but it does kind of preempt a lot of the Web3 stuff. Like, I think a lot of Web3 guys would see that and be like, wow, yeah, that is what we should be doing.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that they are actually doing that. Like, so one of the things that one of their like little pet projects, which they really kind of love talking about at conferences, is kind of like the expansion of the creator economy, right? And this idea that like, so for them, like they diagnose the problem as being that, platforms don't kind of like pay creators enough, but also like not a lot of, we need more people who are like producing content for like said platforms. So the great thing about the creator economy is that it gives you all this like autonomy to create content by like, so where not only can you commodify your own data and like, package it and sell it how you want to, but you also have like, because everything about Web3 is like about microtransactions, and every relationship on the internet in Web3 will be a transactional one, right? Something that we know like definitely doesn't have any problem, like social problems, or have any political consequences.
Real quick, I think one of the big problems with Jaron Lanier's critique is, not only the technological kind of dumbness of it. Okay, we just wait long enough and the technology comes around, but it's fundamentally that it misunderstands the political economy of technology by offering a solution to that political economy based on neoliberal economization, right? It's this idea that it's an anti-politics, right? It's that there's no politics, there's no society, there's no ethics. All the solutions are always found in economization, or the integration of economic rationalities into every single part of life. So if there's a problem about power over data use and ownership, well, that problem can be solved by doing an economic system of microtransactions, right? Hyper commodification will solve that problem. And it's fundamentally not the solution, right? It really is quite literally saying the house is on fire. I know what will put it out. More fire. Right?
The infusion of property rights also, like, as the avenue by which we'll like rationalize and economize new goods and services and intangible assets, is also really it's like every single time there's an enclosure, every single time there's new goods, new services that are previously public or previously unquantified, there's this attempt to try and enclose them and rationalize them or subject them to market logic under the argument that, like, okay, once they do that, it'll be much easier for us to deal with them and to organize them and to be more productive with them and to input them into larger and larger and larger technological processes or whatever else we want to do for a complex civilization. But every single fucking time, almost, what happens is you do it, you consume or you exhaust a lot of the most productive from the market sense and valuable parts of it, right? And then you plug it into processes that aren't actually novelly innovative, not novelly productive in new ways. They're really just reinforcing or making cheaper pre-existing relationships and norms, right? Like the
same
effort,
old apes.
Yeah, like apes, right? Like the efforts
apes for years.
to do nature, right? To quantify and commodifying nature in the name of conservation, right? What's going to end up happening is that they will end up also deciding, as they've already have in some of the proposals, that there's a certain amount of biodiversity that can be lost. And then we can create a really robust system that finds people and punishes them for going beyond that range. Okay, well, isn't the fucking point to preserve as much biodiversity as possible and not like say we're going to consign some of it to the furnaces, and similarly with like the digital world.
As long as we keep the apes.
Right, as long as we keep the apes. And with the digital world, it's like, okay, we're going to sacrifice a lot of the things that people value and genuinely like because they get in the way of like profit or realization of currently illegal or immoral or otherwise taboo profits, right? That's really what I see most of these Web3, gig economy, all of these like frontier, innovative bullshit digital concepts are really just like, for some reason, you guys don't want us to make more money. So like, we're going to wage like a long war maneuver to like fucking brainwash you into believing that it's okay to do that and then do it.
And I think crucially, right, it's just like when we talk about other things, right? It's important not to like almost preemptively have nostalgia for the Web 2 platforms, right? Right? Because that there is we've seen what kind of sort of, and we talked about much on here, in fact, mass exploitation of not just data, but also huge exploitation of labor, especially in the global south, and so on and so on, in order to maintain this central control over data in a way that people want to keep engaging with. And also, again, to kind of compel people to part with their data via a privacy policy rather than compel them to part with it on the basis of a microtransaction, right?
You might be enjoying your video on eBaum's world, but there is blood on your hands, sir.
So it's not that the old system is better. It's that the people fighting to replace it with the new system, coming in with the new paradigm, it's not a new paradigm of relating to you. It's a new paradigm of doing the same kind of things to you, but with tools that they prefer. Effectively.
Yeah, and even thinking of it as paradigms and the way that the marketing terms around Web 2.0 or Web 3 is fundamentally wrong. It's it's more of an infrastructural layering. That's what it is. It's not a paradigmatic rupture or rapture at all. And if there's one takeaway message from this episode, it should be down with the revisionist dogs who don't do historical materialism of the internet, right? Who backtrack it into these like phase progressions or these different distinct stages of the internet. That is wrong. It's ahistorical and it's amaterialist, and it's also so recent in the past that how could we have this level of like broad generalized amnesia already about things that that only just came into fruition not that long ago. Like on the This Machine Kills Patreon, we just wrapped up a book club series that we did on this book by Wendy H.K. Chun, who's a very well-known cultural theorist of kind of cyber cultures and the internet, and does a lot of really great work on that topic. And she wrote this book in 2005 called Control and Freedom: Power and Paranoia in the Age of Fiber Optics. And without realizing it, as we were going through this book, discussing it chapter by chapter, which, this book is really about the first 10 years of the post-privatization internet and and the origins of cyber culture, and the kind of frontier mindset and all of that kind of stuff. And all of the things that she was talking about from the 90s and the early 2000s, all of the critiques and analysis that she was outlining, so much of it fits one-to-one to everything that was currently happening as we were reading and discussing this book with Web3. It really just highlighted how much we have forgotten about what the internet and all of this kind of stuff was like even 10 years ago. And two, how much of it is all still the same stuff, still subjected to the same analysis and same critiques, because it's not so much a paradigmatic disruption, but this mass Men in Black neuralizer that tries to get you to forget what had happened so that they can do it all over again.
Yeah, people are trying to forget Coney 2012, but I'm fucking Clockwork Orange holding their eyelids open, making them remember.
So just before we, could you give an example of what you mean here? How this is, because I think we've talked about sort of how the way this is much of the same, right? The same companies that financed the first wave of startups, now they're financing this wave of DAOs or whatever, right? But is this true? Just it's the same people who are aiming at the same goals, just using a different shaped tool, or is it even less distinctive than that?
I mean, you want to jump in, Ed?
Oh no, I would just say I think it's interesting that in a lot of the speculative bubbles, and even when they burst, the people who made a lot of money in one carry it forward or make it again in another, right? Because you still retain the connections, and that's really all you need. If you want to make a lot of money in these fields. And so what you end up seeing is a firm like A16Z, or Andreessen Horowitz is going to make money both off of the Web 3.0 and also the traditional Web 2.0 platforms, right? Because a lot of the times what distinguishes a Web 2.0 and a Web 3.0 platform is the statement that the company gives as to why they're investing in this firm as opposed to another, right? Like Uber is a Web 2.0 firm, maybe in that taxonomy, right? But if you were to create an Uber that for some reason was exclusively operating on the blockchain, or said it was, even if it wasn't, right? It was taking crypto payments. If it was a way to if you could figure out some weird, novel application of it that wasn't particularly useful but shiny, that would be a Web 3.0 application, even though the difference really is just like UI, payment system, and who it's explicitly targeting, right? It's not like a true fundamental difference in those instances when it's the same funder involved. There's also a general difference in that, like, yeah, this is in one way or another, it's supposed to be a different type of firm startup that is either more explicitly based in crypto, more explicitly based in decentralization, whatever that may look like, and other firms have room to butt in their heads there. But I would think like a lot of the funders and investors are similar to like Web 2.0 because they have the money,
Yeah, it's the same people. And I'll just really quickly jump into saying it's not only many of the same people and financial interests, it's many of the same like political ideologies and propagandas, right? Around the first chapter of Wendy Chun's book is called Why Cyberspace. And it's looking at this frontier, electronic frontier, cyberspace mentality of the internet as, the next stage for capitalist imperialism to colonize, right? And that mentality still exists, and we still see that same kind of propaganda and that same kind of political ideology rolled out with Web3. They talk about frontierism, right? I mean, this is also Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and the space race, right? Space is the final frontier. Rosa Luxemburg talked about imperialism. Lenin talked about imperialism as a core part of capitalism, as a core part of the acceleration and overaccumulation of capitalism is a constant search for new frontiers to colonize, to extract, to exploit, to dump the overproduced commodities into those places, right? And this is very much the same kind of political economic dynamics that we see happening with new technologies, new frontiers, but at the core, it's still the same old stuff for hundreds of years. And I think this is the big thing that's at the core of my my political economic analysis of technology is that nothing, there are new things, but nothing is new in this sense of we've never seen this before, right? I think that we can learn a lot by applying just pretty a fundamental critique of political economy to the world around us and continue to rediscover the same analysis. It's just new technologies hiding old dynamics.
Well, there's nothing new under the sun, but what if we checked a different sun? Or what if we invented a sun on the blockchain for there to be stuff on? Man, I have so much more to talk about with you guys.
What if on the blockchain you could buy a picture of a sun that was smoking weed and doing the pussy eating gesture?
As ever, every time we talk, I end up with 30 more things I want to get into, such as the history of Web 2.0 and Tim O'Reilly and the technological theory of bubbles, but
Coney 2012.
Well,
yeah, sure.
Absolutely. But once again, we have come to our limit of time. But Ed and Jathan,
the bell is going off.
Bell is going. As ever, it is always a massive pleasure to talk to you guys. And thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Always fun. And this is also why our episodes on This Machine Kills range from an hour and a half to 2 hours long. because we do not have the time discipline of Riley to be like, oh, okay, there's time. Let's end the conversation.
Because you don't have the bell.
Exactly. You guys got to get a bell.
We need a bell
system. Yeah. We got to go to the next podcast.
You should you could connect your two bells on the basis of a blockchain so that it's immutable. You have an immutable record of when the bell rang.
It's quantum. That's important. Actually, it's not just blockchain, it's quantum now. We could do that.
Yeah.
No, I cannot recommend this Machine Kills enough. If you are listening to this, you should check it out. And additionally, I want to thank you for listening to the free episodes. Consider listening to the paid ones. It's $5 a month. You get a second episode every week.
And a free ape.
Oh, we can't afford that. What are you talking about?
Shit. It's a live ape. You get a real...
Yeah, we can afford that. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, but thank you once again, Ed and Jathan, for coming on. Check out TMK. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in a few days. Bye, everyone.
Bye.